We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GBNews,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good evening. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight we'll have the latest on a disturbing situation in the Netherlands where police have fired shots at protesting farmers. They've lost a Prime Minister, but do they need to find a soul? My guests and I will analyse a tumultuous week for the Conservative Party. Plus, our Great Britain this week is Kevin Rodham, a 65-year-old retired engineer who now spends his time delivering aid to Ukraine. All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Rhiannon Jones.
Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps is the latest MP to launch his Conservative Party leadership bid. His announcement comes after Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who is tipped as a front-runner, ruled himself out of the race. Posting on Twitter, he said his focus is his current job and keeping the country safe. Others to enter the contest include former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and Rishi Sunak. Conservative MP Steve Baker says the party needs to find stability.
I know people are terribly angry and upset and bitter, and I've been called all the names under the sun. But we've got to face the reality. If he wasn't going, he couldn't form a government, and you just can't go on like that. You can't stand alone. You've got to form a government, and his government just collapsed. And that's very serious. What we need is political stability. I regret he's going. It's the right decision. We need to now try and find an optimistic way forward.
Tom Hunt, the MP for Ipswich, told GB News he's backing Kemi Badenoch.
I see a candidate that I think is really strong, and if I see a candidate that excites me, if I see a candidate that I think has a really exciting and compelling vision and can win the next election and defeat Labour, then I'm going to want to back them. And for me, Kemi ticks those boxes. You know, she's fresh, she's authentic, as I say, she's not smooth. Well, I would say she probably is smooth, but not smooth in an inauthentic way.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has appeared in court charged with rape. Special Constable Paul Hoyle was arrested in Essex on Wednesday following an alleged attack near Newport in Shropshire. He's been suspended from the force and has been remanded in custody. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister says he's willing to resign to make way for an all-party government following demonstrations across the country. Thousands of protesters stormed the president's official residence in the capital, with some ending up in the swimming pool. Earlier, police fired water cannon and tear gas at demonstrators. They're demanding a change in regime as the country sees its worst economic crisis in more than 70 years. Muslims around the world are marking Eid this weekend. Thousands of people gathered in Birmingham for morning prayers for the second and biggest of the two main holidays on the Islamic calendar. It coincides with the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. These are live shots from Mecca, where hundreds of thousands of pilgrims have been gathering for the annual ritual, throwing pebbles on giant columns which symbolise Satan. Numbers are being limited this year in the wake of the pandemic. And history's been made at Wimbledon, with Elena Rybakina becoming the first player from Kazakhstan to win a Grand Slam title. The 23-year-old fought back to beat Tunisian third seed Ons Jabeur in 3 sets. She was born in Moscow, but despite Wimbledon's ban on Russian and Belarusian players after the invasion of Ukraine, Rybakina was allowed to compete as she switched to represent Kazakhstan 4 years ago, there to present the women's singles champion with the Venus Rosewater dish, the Duchess of Cambridge. TV Online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
The running of this country has precious little to do with we the people. That much becomes more obvious every day. Ever more blatantly, the powers that be are treating us like the sitting tenants in a property they want to knock down so they can sell the plot for profit to their pals and assorted foreign carpetbaggers. We the people, with our individual opinions and ambitions and dreams, are just in the way of our anti-human fantasy of a so-called progressive future. They got fed up waiting for us to die of old age in our armchairs in front of 3-bar electric fires we can't afford to switch on, and have set about demolishing the old place while we're still living in it. Love him or loathe him, and I've been no fan of him or of any of the leaders we find ourselves saddled with in the West. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was brought down last week, not by the millions who had voted for him, as might have been appropriate given any meaningful understanding of the concept of democracy, but by a hellish coupling of media and the self-worshipping political class that appointed themselves judge, jury and executioner. Together they wanted Johnson gone, and so he was gone. The party atmosphere after his resignation, the glee and the gloating by those journalists that had conspired and shared in the taking of his scalp was plain to see. I really don't think it's supposed to be that way. In the aftermath of Johnson's defenestration, there was a suggestion from former Tory MP John Major that the process of anointing the next leader of the Conservatives should bypass party members altogether, presumably in case troublesome proles with their taste for Brexit and borders, even for Britain itself, picked the wrong person again. Far better, thought the likes of Major, if Tory MPs just exercised their superior intellects and morals and did choosing for them. Hoary old Tory and arch-Remainer Michael Heseltine's cage was evidently rattled by all the noise, and in predictable style he was instantly crowing that the passing of Johnson should mean the end of Brexit. Once more, the proof that those regarding themselves as our intellectual superiors still regard a decision made by an undeniable majority of British people only as evidence of the stupidity of the great unwashed. In displays of audacity and temerity that are beyond the reach of adjectives, those that plotted Johnson's demise are falling over one another to take his place. It's like looking through a microscope at something revolting happening in a petri dish. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak had his slick and glossy showreel ready for broadcast before his former boss had delivered his resignation speech. I wonder when he performed for that, instead of doing more damage to the economy. I don't feel like having any of their names in my mouth. I really don't. So I'll just say that for me, the thought of any that stood for lockdowns, for damaging children's physical and mental well-being, that oversaw the crashing of the economy, watched uncounted lives physically and mentally destroyed, advocated mask wearing on the street, and cheerled the unholy pressure to take experimental injections or lose jobs and/or reputations as a consequence, that called for digital vaccine passports or anything like them, that won't shout from the highest hill that the green agenda and net zero are a disaster and must be scrapped immediately, The thought of any that demanded it all, or stayed silent while it all played out, should now occupy number 10 and contemplate more of the same in the months ahead makes me sick to my stomach. For me, the change of Prime Minister is nothing more than a change of drivers on a train. The train we're on is going where it's scheduled and timetabled to go, on rails already laid. And in the face of its forward momentum, we the people, it would seem, count for nothing. From behind one podium after another, Western leaders and their lackeys talk more and more openly about a liberal world order, even a rules-based liberal world order. The more I hear and see about a world ordered by self-described liberals and their rules, the less I like it. I certainly don't recall ever being invited to vote for it. 2 years ago, I gave scant thought to acronyms like WHO, UN, WEF. Now I watch them with the same attention I give to dogs that look like they might bite. At some point in the past, and I missed that point too, whenever it was, I'll freely admit, the governing class decided they were done with serving us and that they own us and rule us instead. That cancerous thought has metastasised in recent years, so that it's not just governments and their bureaucrats and preferred scientists who presume to lord it over us, to tell us what to do, what to think. That same deranged thought is there throughout the greediest capitalist corporations now as well. The technocrats took free speech by the throat long ago so as to preserve and push their own self-described progressive ideologies. Now that same superiority complex is everywhere else as well. Halifax Bank got on their high horse about pronouns and loftily declared that customers who didn't like seeing staff wearing such on their badges should take their business elsewhere. And so customers duly did, right enough, taking their hard-earned cash with them. Since when did money-grubbing corporations decide it was appropriate to start telling customers what to think about sex and gender? Ice cream vendors Ben and Jerry's got on their soapbox to criticise the British government's plan to offshore asylum seekers to Rwanda, when surely their time would be better spent learning more about obesity and diabetes and their likeliest causes. So here we are. We, the British people, are held in low regard, not just by politicians and their ilk, not just by the awkward savants of the search engines and social media platforms, but even by high street banks and ice cream vendors. It feels like there's a club somewhere, or a positive feedback loop, in which everyone involved, and it's definitely not us, politicians of all stripes, faceless bureaucrats, journalists, bankers and corporations, feels entitled to make all the decisions about every aspect of our lives and then to tell us how it's going to be. We the people are to be downtrodden, demoralised and deceived. In the wider world, it's the farmers who are the latest citizens pushed beyond breaking point. In a replay of the truckers' protest in Canada that so captivated many of us, gave us hope, however brief, that an end to the deliberately destructive madness might be in sight, there are tractor protests in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, in Poland. When those who grow and raise the food we eat are angry and scared enough to down tools and take to the streets to fight for their very existence, when those who drive the trucks that bring us everything we depend upon for our daily lives have done likewise, perhaps it's finally time to pay attention to the unfolding catastrophe. Among the Dutch farmers, the anger was pushed above boiling point by government diktats regarding emissions of nitrogen and ammonia into the environment. Plans to reduce those emissions by as much as 70% will, farmers say, put many of them out of business altogether. They say it's not about saving nature, but about leftist government plans to change land use in the Netherlands, forcing farmers to sell their land and to cut the national cattle herd by as much as 50%. Dutch farmers are among the most productive in the world, exporting $100 billion worth of dairy and crops every year. Their banners say, "No farmers, no food." The world is in a time of food insecurity, and still governments would apparently prefer to contemplate a future in which people will suffer in every conceivable way. And in the future presently shaping up, people will most definitely suffer. Those governments are plainly not in the business of fixing anything, rather making matters worse. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he that forcibly shut down the truckers' protest in his own country and seized their bank accounts, has his country on a similar path to that of the Dutch. In a time of global food insecurity, blamed in part on war in Ukraine ideologically driven administrations are stamping their metaphorical boots down upon their farmers' backs. In Holland, shots have been fired, allegedly by police, at one tractor. This is how basic things are becoming, how near the bone. Here in the West, in the 21st century, we're being prepared not just for a future without cars, but a future of less energy, less warmth, and even less food. I knew there was something badly wrong with all that's going on when I realised my response to what was happening, to all that we're being told, was physical. All of this actually makes me feel ill, to my bones. I've never in my life before listened to government policy and to the policies of governments all around the world and felt endangered. But I do now. If you feel that too, a deep physiological response to the last 2 years and a growing sense of something malevolent, then you're not alone. Sometimes it feels like society itself has been poisoned and that all that society is being offered is yet more poisonous nonsense. We should notice that it's from among us, the ordinary people, that the farmers and the truckers come, so that it's we who really have the power that matters in the end. In Sri Lanka, they're quite a bit further down the road than us, although hardly out of sight. Thousands of people, driven beyond endurance by economic collapse and the worst food and fuel shortages in living memory, found they had nothing left to lose. I read this morning about protesters there storming and occupying their president's official residence in the city of Colombo. Desperate people and desperate measures. It's interesting to note that contrary to what Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum might think, it turns out that when some people find they actually do own nothing anymore, they're really not very happy at all. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well @gbnews, and I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show if there's time. With me tonight, I am delighted to welcome for the first time onto my sofa Dr. Lisa Mackenzie, ethnographer and academic, and Jacob Reynolds from the Battle of Ideas charity, who is convening a conference next weekend looking at why events seem so out of control at the moment. Lisa, welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
I don't want help from the state, but I certainly don't want to feel that they're out to get me either.
I think what you've said tonight was really powerful, actually, because before I came in here and before I actually heard what you said or what you were going to say, I've been complaining all week about how powerless I feel, but also I'm speaking to other people who also feel powerless. And it's simple things like not being able to get to a doctor's, not being able to get your prescriptions on time. Simple things like things not being in the shops that you need to have. And again, some people have blamed Brexit for this, but I'm not sure this is Brexit. I think this is something else. I've recently been to the US.
What is that something else?
Do you know, as you were speaking, I wrote something down about he who controls our resources controls the world. And I think it is something about controlling resources, making things scarce and scant. And when people feel that their resources are limited and there is scarce and scant resources, what they do is their fear becomes internalised. And once you get internalised fear, what you can't have is political community movements because people see each other as enemies. You know, I must have this. I think the other thing that is happening here, I think there is, I don't know if it's purposeful or if it's by accident, but resources are being hoarded. I don't know where or who is ordering it. I don't know if it's by accident, but things like I said, doctor's appointment, getting to the hospital, trying to speak to counsellors, trying to find out what's happening in your community. Everybody's feeling lost. Something is wrong. And I know I'm not the only person that thinks this way. It's not a malaise. In the media, in the mainstream media, we're here constantly all the time. The working class are malaised. You know, they're not interested, they don't care. That is not the case. They care, they are angry, They are confused. They don't know what's happening, but they know that there is something very profound that is changing.
Jacob, profound. I mean, that's a word that resonates with me. What do you feel about the way that the society itself seems to be being treated at the moment by those with the power to do anything about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, to your comments earlier and to Lisa's, I mean, you used the metaphor of a train and it's as if we're just kind of changing drivers. To me, the situation's slightly different, but perhaps more scary for that reason. It's not that we're changing drivers. I think it's more the feeling that no one's in control. And you saw this demonstrated kind of quite well with the kind of the charade around Boris Johnson's ousting, where it felt kind of sinister, the whole affair, precisely because it was an internal thing happening with no reference and no regard to the people, and also no reference or regard to ideas. And so none of the candidates really, there might be an odd exception here and there, but none of the candidates really have an answer or a programme about how to get to grips with the crises we face.
It did feel, didn't it, as though a clique turned its backs on the people, just looked inward to satisfy themselves and decided that, well, Boris Johnson was going to go. 80-seat majority or the product of a successful election campaign or not, he was to go.
Yeah,
whether we were bothered or not.
Yeah, I mean, the Tories have always been kind of relatively swift at acting when they think the leader's unpopular, but this feels, I think, uniquely or apolitical an event. It feels as if, I mean, it almost feels like the people engaged in ousting, I couldn't even explain why they were doing it. Each of these resignation letters was more kind of vapid than the last. It was as if they were kind of written half asleep, but nobody could offer any reasons really for what's going on. And of course, Boris Johnson, there are many things we should hold Boris Johnson to account for. He completely failed to take up the mantle of Brexit properly. He's kind of got bogged down in all of these environmental issues. He hasn't tried to restructure the economy in the way that we need it to be. He hasn't kind of delivered on his promise of levelling up and kind of rebuilding the country properly. So there's lots to kind of be angry at Boris Johnson about, but that political anger was weirdly missing from all of the events of the week.
And being brought down by journalists and by a relentless media campaign felt distinctly inappropriate to me as well. Yeah,
I think this week I felt unease, and I'm not sure why. I'm not a Boris Johnson fan at all. I would speak against him all the time. His carelessness. He's been a careless politician. So I'm no fan, but I've got to say I have a fear of what is coming. I imagine what will be coming is a low-tax Tory, which means austerity. I imagine that the levelling up project will probably silently go away. I come from Nottingham, from Nottinghamshire, from the red wall seats. I've watched those communities decline and disintegrate over 40 years. My dad was made redundant from the mines in '92. He's never worked since. And that is very typical of his generation. I have watched those communities they've been under the heel for years and years. I'm not saying the Tories could have ever, they did a lot of that damage, but there was some hope when Boris Johnson was talking about levelling up. I think the next Prime Minister will allow that to disappear, and I think the Labour Party would definitely let that go.
Profound unease, I think, to stitch together two of the words that you were using. But we've got to go to a break, after which we'll take a more in-depth look at the farmer protests I mentioned at the top of the programme. We'll be joined by a Dutch politician and also by one of the protesters.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Police in the Netherlands fired shots at farmers in their tractors last week. That's a sentence I never expected to hear myself say out loud. The incident happened during protests by thousands of Dutch farmers, angry at government plans to cut their use of fertilisers and reduce their cattle herds in the name of saving the environment. There have been clashes with police, and farmers have used their tractors to block roads, sprayed government buildings with manure and blocked access to buildings. Meanwhile, supermarkets lie severely depleted of food. Unrest has spread across Europe to Germany, Italy and Poland. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said of his proposals to cut emissions, quote, "The honest message is that not all farmers will continue in business. Those that do will have to farm differently." I'm joined now by Dutch politician Simone Kersboom and Jeroen van Manen from the Dutch Dairy Farmers Association. Good evening to you both, and thank you for taking the time. Jeroen, if I can address you first of all, have you been taking part in the protests?
Yes, the protests are in Holland already for over 2 years, and since they've been here the last 2 years, I've been organising and taking part of it.
I can't hear Jeroen at the moment. I'm sorry about that, Jeroen. I'll come to you, Simone, if I may. This is a cause of unrest. This unrest has been simmering for longer than a few weeks, has it not?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I mean, these plans that the government has now announced have been playing for many years already, but now they just have made it concrete. And I mean, they have announced that they want to reduce nitrogen emissions in the Netherlands by about 70%. That means that up to 50% of private farms in the Netherlands could be expropriated by the state. And of course, the excuse is an invented nitrogen crisis. Just in order to comply with rules and standards set by the European Union for nature preservations. And farms have been identified as a major threat to these fake nature preservation goals. And so these farmers need to go, according to the Dutch government. But, can you imagine, Neil, if your life's work, the work of generations of your family to provide food for your country and for the rest of the world, suddenly being declared to be a public enemy and you're being forced off your land. And, so the farmers quite rightfully have started these demonstrations against this government policy. And they're not taking this lying down. And these protests have seen distribution centers being blocked, roads being blocked, demonstrations in cities across the Netherlands and outside of Parliament and other municipal offices. And we absolutely stand behind our farmers in this existential battle that is taking place here.
Now, you've said it's been this concern about nitrates and fertiliser and the rest is not new. It seems incomprehensible in a time of global food insecurity that any government would choose now to bring about such a crisis by cracking down on its farmers, and the Dutch farmers of all farmers who produce so much of the food upon which the wider world depends. Where is the sanity in that?
Now, I think you're asking one of the most essential questions that is taking place here. How can this happen, especially in this time in the world? And, well, my party looks at it a certain way, and we're seeing this just as part of facilitating, the globalist agenda, the Great Reset, Agenda 2030. The farmers' land is needed to facilitate a mass migration. Farmers are, of course, major land owners in the Netherlands. So, of course, if land is needed, the Netherlands is a tiny, tiny country. And if you want to bring more people in, you're going to need land to build houses. And then, of course, there's also the transnational agenda. I think that is very important, an important part of that Great Reset. And that is to destroy the self-reliance and sovereignty through reliance on international supply chains. And they want to make us more dependent on international supply chains. They want to weaken Dutch sovereignty and autonomy. And they want to turn us into one large city. And I think that's the agenda. One large city without its own means of production, without autonomy, without sovereignty, without its own food production. And that is to make people more dependent on international leaders and the globalists. And then I think the third most important point, and perhaps on a more philosophical level, is that it's about uprooting people. Farmers present a link to the land, but it's about more than simply facilitating mass migration and transnational agenda, because farmers also represent a deep historical and physical connection to the land. And in the Netherlands especially, our farms and our agricultural sector are also a symbol of our national identity. So getting rid of farmers is also about uprooting people and severing their connection with the land. Farmers, by their very being, thus present a direct threat to the globalist, transnational and post-identitarian goals. So the real point is the Great Reset, so things like mass immigration, transnational governance, and that is why they want people to lose their connection to the land and become global citizens without roots.
Jeroen, if I can come to you now, hopefully we've sorted out that brief technical issue there. What Simone's saying there about farmers representing a profound connection to the land, how do you respond to that thought as one of those farmers?
Yes, I think someone couldn't have said it any better than she did. It's true. It's, farmers are having their farms and farming for over decades, and generations after generation farmed on the same land. So, yes, it's a true connection.
If you were to meet the restrictions and the conditions that are being laid down to you by the government at the moment, would you personally be able to keep going? Would you be able to continue to farm?
No, I don't think so. It's as a result of the nitrogen politics. They made some different regions, and some regions have to cut down emissions by 12%, other by 46%. Then there's a few regions with 75%, and the regions which are in nature surroundings, they have to cut down 95%. But well, as the margins of farming are this low as it is on this moment, I can't keep on farming when I lose 12% of my income.
As I asked of Simone, what do you make of the timing? After the 2 years that we've just had with lockdowns and interrupted supply lines and all the rest of it, what do you make of the timing that the government of the Netherlands, where so much of the food that so many people depend on comes from, choose this moment to make life impossible for so many farmers? Jeroen, what do you think of that? What do you make of the timing?
Yes, it's ridiculous. The world is in a crisis, and we have lots of stuff going on in Russia and Ukraine. And a lot of people demand on feed which is coming far away. And then we have a very good region for farming as it is in Holland. And we start kicking off farmers of the land up there. It's crazy, whatever. And the tool is to make farmers responsible for every bit of pollution there is, whether it's CO2 or methane or nitrogen or water quality or antibiotics use, whatever. Whatever chapter you take, Dutch farming is world champion on that. So kicking off Dutch farmers out of the country, somewhere else in the world, the production needs to come back, and it's everywhere it's coming back. The standard will be lower than in Holland, and for every hectare we get out of use for agriculture in Holland, well, somewhere in Brazil or wherever needs to be 3 hectares of forage cut down to make for the same production as we do in Holland. So it's crazy, it's ridiculous.
Simone, if I can come back to you, I mentioned the unrest is spreading. You know, the farmers in Germany, in Italy, Poland, elsewhere. I don't suppose they're all angry about precisely the same issues as the Dutch farmers. But what do you make of the way in which the dissatisfaction, the anger of the people who produce the food we eat is spreading in the way that it is?
Well, I think, once again, this is twofold. We already saw similar legislation being passed, pushed in the rest of the world during COVID. Different countries were implementing the same policies. And we're seeing this attack on farms taking place now. And of course, as I already mentioned, of course, they want to make us completely dependent for our food on the international supply chains. But I think my party leader has also mentioned this already, and he says that the problem with politicians and members of parliament, not only in the Netherlands, but in the Western world, is that they've become micromanagers. So, in the Netherlands, we get presented with a nitrogen crisis. That is then the stick with which they want to beat the farmers. It is simply just an excuse to facilitate a larger agenda. But all those politicians are simply focusing on that nitrogen crisis. They're focusing on how can we reduce nitrogen emissions by taking away farms. They're debating about the price to give farmers to take away their land. But they're not taking a step back and looking at how all these smaller issues that are taking place, like the COVID policies, like climate hysteria, like this invented nitrogen crisis that we have now, what that actually means for our economy in the long run. What does that mean for food production in the long run? What does that mean for our sovereignty and our autonomy in the long run? And like I said, that's not just happening in the Netherlands, that is happening everywhere in the world. And that is why this is a much larger fight than just taking place here. And this is a fight that we are facing together. This is part of Agenda 2030. We've got 8 more years to fight this agenda, and that needs to be globally. We can't just do this in the Netherlands. We can't do this in Italy. We need to go to Canada. We need to go to Australia. We need to go to the UK. This is a fight. Like I said, this is an existential fight, and we need to stay strong together and keep on fighting that agenda so that we can at least ensure that our nation stays sovereign and that our food production remains in the hands of farmers.
Strong words, moving words. Simone Kersboom, Jeroen van Manen, thank you so much for your time. I wish I had more time with you, but I have to get on with the evening here. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time that you've been able to give us this evening.
Thank you, Neil.
Jacob,
it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a distressing tone to the whole evening, I would say, that we're hearing, profound unease that Lisa was talking about, and to hear about an existential threat to farmers, one of the bedrock industries upon which we all depend. What is going on?
Yeah, well, like many, I guess I offer my full support to all of those who are resisting these, to what seem to any reasonable observer completely insane measures from the Dutch government, which, as people have noted, there are similar measures or similar environmental regulations and a similar environmental agenda right across the Western world. So it's a fight that, in a way, we all have a stake in. I think, though, we don't necessarily need to go kind of behind the scenes to figure out what this is about. We don't need to kind of reach for explanations of a Great Reset or whatever. This is about environmental regulation and about the fact that lots of the kind of key people who make decisions across society have become completely captivated by the ideology of environmentalism. And we are all, and they're feeling it in the Netherlands and we feel it in the UK in various ways, but we're all feeling the effects of the fact that human beings are increasingly being cast as a problem that need to be managed on the planet, and that we have to all cut down, live pared-back lives, lead simpler, more frugal existences in order to meet these kind of abstract environmental targets. I think that I can fully support that, and we should all kind of notice that this is going to affect us too as well.
You're nodding along.
I'm nodding and also laughing at I agree with you that this, we need to live more frugal lives and think about our flights and what we do, except for the people who jet around to have a breakfast meeting, except for them. They don't have to do that. But one of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to the guest talking was, if they cut cattle production all over Europe, the worst place to have cattle production is in Brazil, where you start cutting down the rainforest. Wouldn't that encourage rainforest, cutting rainforest down to raise cattle? So, sort of having a policy in this place and not thinking about its global consequence, because the politicians may want us to all live frugal lives, but that isn't going to happen. People are still going to resist, and they're still going to want to eat meat. There's nothing wrong with eating meat. And so the production will move somewhere else, perhaps to people who don't matter as much, and chopping down rainforests. So I don't I mean, you're an historian. Tell me, post-1945, when, Europe was devastated, there was sort of a consensus that we had to do something, and there was a population consensus throughout Europe and the world that we must work together and do something. Post-2020, or post-2022, there seems to be a consensus that we should make people struggle.
Well, Jacob, I think, touched on it on the relevant point. I think we are being groomed to accept lesser lives, and I've felt for the longest time that the policy is not about going green; it's about going without. And we're being, for the first time, a generation is being readied to go backwards rather than forwards.
Yeah,
and I think it's in line with an ideology, as you said.
Yeah, well, and I think oftentimes people don't kind of fully reckon with the consequences of environmentalism. People like the idea of kind of protecting the planet and saving seals and all the rest of it. People are on board with that. The effect that is going to have increasingly on our everyday lives, from the price of petrol to heating your home, like, people are going to get more understanding of this, and there'll be more protests like there are in the Netherlands.
It's somber stuff this evening, but have to keep moving forward here on the show. While Dutch farmers fight for the survival of their industry, farmers here at home are offering their own warnings that a chronic shortage of workers is hitting food production and driving up the price of foodstuffs. 8 out of 10 farmers looking for workers have received few applications or none at all. Farmers blame COVID and Brexit and say unharvested crops have been left to rot in the fields for want of workers, and healthy pigs have been culled on farms because of shortages of slaughterhouse workers to process them. In April, MPs were told that in the summer of last year there were 500,000 unfilled vacancies, and that shortages felt now will only get worse in the months ahead. Joining me now is Jason Salisbury, farmer and cheesemaker from Sark in the wondrous Channel Islands. Good evening to you. Thanks for making time for us, Jason.
Good evening. Hello.
Is yours a business that's been in your family for a while? Do you come from generations of the same?
No, not at all. I wasn't very good at school, so I went up through the ranks of dairy farming at age 16 and ended up working for the co-op farms in Shropshire, and gradually worked my way through the ranks until I was made redundant in 2004. So we decided to go out and buy our own cows and set up a cheese-making business in Suffolk. And the business grew and grew, and we were able to take on a tenancy on the Isle of Sark last year. So things have grown slightly.
Now, having said that, there you tell us a story there of having changed direction, having invested time and effort and made a success of something new. Are the pressures on farming elsewhere reaching you? Are you feeling the same pinch, for want of a bigger word?
Without a shadow of doubt. I would imagine that costs themselves, and probably in the last 6 months or so, have certainly gone up 20-25%, and that could be anything from fertiliser to seed to grain to plastics to absolutely everything has gone up. You can't imagine that nothing will, and it's not just a gradual rise either. It's a sudden. It's probably since February, since Russia and Ukraine have kicked in, it's been a massive rise. And of course, people have also tried to get back what they've lost over the COVID pandemic and obviously Brexit as well. So it's a combination of three things really, which have really grown, and it's it's hard. So we are looking at ways of being even more efficient than we are, and eventually we will have to pass the costs back onto the customer.
When I think about it, we see the consequences of, for example, when there's rumours that we're about to run out of loo roll. We see what happens in the supermarkets when word of that kind of shortage goes around. But shortages of basic foodstuffs or essential foodstuffs becoming essentially unaffordable, that will be quite a shock for most British people, will it not?
Yes, it will. But if you were to ask the general public what price was a litre of milk when they go into a supermarket, the chances are that they probably won't even know. If you put 10 pence on a litre of milk and you gave that straight back to the farmer, which some supermarkets did, but that would save the dairy industry overnight, and people would be happy to pay 10p. What's 10p? You'd lose that down the back of the sofa. So it's very, very important just to keep buying local and keep supporting certainly the dairy industry in the UK.
Around 12%, I read, of British farmers are said to be planning to quit the industry. I mean, let's just take that as a helpful figure to give us an idea. Are we contemplating, do you think, a very different use of our landscape? Are we talking about a deliberate and choreographed change to the way in which we as a population obtain and source our food and use the land?
I think there'll always be, land will always be farmed, and land will always be farmed in the most efficient way. There's no way that you could drive a combine up a mountain, for instance. So you've got to have sheep on a mountain to graze it. These things are here to stay. What we'll probably find is that more and more people will come in and able to manage those units and become even more efficient with better animals or husbandry ways. You talk about a 12%, but I would just wonder what the average is anyway. How many people are coming in and how many people are actually leaving naturally through succession and so forth. So, it's a figure, but let's just wait and see exactly what happens with it.
I have to ask you while I have you here, Sark is somewhere I've visited, and it lives in my memory as a kind of a paradise of sorts. Is it keeping you proof from the what's happening elsewhere in the world, or do you feel increasingly that the outside world is encroaching upon you and bringing down wider world problems?
It's definitely very real. For instance, electricity, for instance, is generated by a diesel generator. So the price of diesel is going up, therefore the price of electricity. For instance, our electric this month is 56 pence a kilowatt, and it's more likely to go even higher, that's probably to 80 pence a kilowatt in the not so distant future. So prices are going up. Of course, everything coming onto the island is brought in on freight. So again, that's diesel again. And it's, the costs of actually staying on an isolated island is massive. However, we do have huge benefits as well. I mean, we have very little crime. There's no roads, there's no cars, there's no queuing for a petrol station. It's great, and it's a very relaxed environment to live in.
Jason Salisbury, entrepreneur, farmer, cheesemaker, very useful insights. Thank you so much for making time for us this evening. I have to press on. Thank you for now.
Thank
you. You may have noticed that it's been a fairly busy week on the British political scene. After the break, we'll be discussing what's next for the Conservative Party following the departure of Mr. Boris Johnson.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Thanks for staying with me. My next guest this evening says the Conservatives need to find their soul. Dr. Rakib Ehsan is a columnist at The Critic magazine, amongst other things. In an article published last week, he wrote that, quote, stable families and resilient communities are the cornerstone of robust societies. Dr. Ehsan joins me now. Good evening, Doctor.
Evening, Neil. How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you. What does the soul of a Conservative look like?
Well, I think that the Tories at the moment, they somewhat lack programmatic identity, Neil. I think that a lot of what they're doing, there's not much of a philosophical grounding to it. So the piece I authored for The Critic, I wanted to articulate what I consider to be a wholesome post-Brexit conservatism. So I think that in terms of social policy, there would have to be a recognition that many of the economic and social ills that Britain is currently experiencing, that could be traced down back to the breakdown of the family unit and also the breakdown of local communities more generally. And I feel that at the Conservative Party, the modern day Conservative Party, I think that there are far too many MPs which they're rather uncomfortable when it comes to discussing the value of stable family units, how it's so important to have a loving, stable family home to help with young people's progression, their personal development, doing well at school, and then progressing in life afterwards. So I think at the heart of my piece was almost a rallying call for a more family-centred social policy.
Absolutely, absolutely that. But I would say that the traditional family is absolutely under attack here in modern Britain and across the West. What say you?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that much of that nonsense actually comes from sort of these American facilities which very much focused on identity politics, but also push out what I would consider to be fervently anti-family agendas, portraying the family as a oppressive, hierarchical social structure. Now, of course, the various family models exist that can provide young people with a loving and stable environment as they're growing up. But I think that we should be unafraid when it comes to saying that there are certain family models which are more effective when it comes to young people's progression and development. And I do feel that there has to be a recognition that two-parent households, spearheaded by a married couple, that is the family model which is most strongly associated with a range of positive youth outcomes, whether that's school attainment, cognitive development, not being involved in the criminal justice system, and then further down the line, obtaining employment.
Why? I'm listening so carefully to what you're saying and agreeing with what you're saying. In whose interests and to what end would any government or any society undermine that most foundational and fundamental building block? What's in it for them?
Well, I think that much of this aggressive statists are responsible, that you have that. And it's a shame, Neil, as you know, you're a historian. There used to be that communitarian tradition on the British left, which really valued family, marriage and community. Also the church as well. I've always believed that the Labour Party owes more to Methodism than Marxism. But you do have people, they just believe that the state can intervene in various aspects of social life, which I fundamentally disagree with. And I feel that they see that by breaking down the family unit, and they almost want to intervene in the relationship between parent and child, by doing that, they're able to wield more power when it comes to controlling younger sections of society, and ultimately seduce young people into ultimately falling in love with this, well, I'd say, deeply depressing victimhood agenda. So I do feel that that's why they are driven when it comes to actively destroying the family unit, because they see it as a step towards broader population control.
If there are solutions to be found, Dr. Hassan, surely they must exist elsewhere and not in Westminster. I feel so much at the moment in relation to so many topics that we have to look for the answers within our communities and not coming out of the Palace of Westminster.
I agree. I think that for some time, many of our fellow citizens, they don't trust Westminster. Their trust in Parliament is relatively low. There's various forms of political disaffection which exist in our local communities. So I agree. I think when it comes to those solutions to the social, economic and cultural ills that we see in our society, I think that increasingly more and more people are not looking to Westminster. They're looking for the solutions within their local communities. And I do feel that when it comes to developing civic assets, which really help to boost the well-being of local communities, various local organisations and institutions that help with young people's development, you'll see that the government is not even involved in much of the good work that's being done in local communities. And I think that as people have increasingly low levels of trust in Westminster, they're going to look to develop their own innovative, creative social initiatives which help to uplift their local communities and enhance well-being in their local neighbourhoods.
Dr. Rakib Hassan, writer and commentator, thank you so much for your insights this evening, and I'll hope to pick up this conversation with you on another occasion. Thanks for now.
Thank you for having me.
Lisa, the foundation, the family. It's right, isn't it?
Okay, I'm gonna sort of go through this a little bit. So, communities and families don't just break; they are broken. They don't just break. They don't just everything's okay, we're all going on all right, and then they break. Policy happens, government changes, moral values take on different roles in society, and communities and families become victims of that. And they do become victims of that. So I'm thinking particularly about John Major. So I remember when John Major came to power, and I know he's always seen as the sort of liberal and, you know, the nice Tory. I remember when he first came to power, and I had just had my son. So it was, I don't know, 91, I think. And I remember he went full on attacking single mums, but particularly working class women, who he said was getting pregnant for a council house. And I remember the harm and the hurt that caused me and lots of other women at the time, that we were accused of having children just to get a council house. And obviously that wasn't true, but that was a moral judgment on women like me. And I'd just like to say as well that positive outcomes for children are not really based on a two-parent model. They are based on having things like a safe home, an affordable home, a place that's not dripping with damp, good schools. Children don't get into crime if they live in a nice community that looks after them, that's got good schools, that they don't have to be moving every 6 months. So there is a lot to be said really about the social conditions that children are brought up in, not just the family condition.
Jacob, I know that you've got things that you'd like to say about this, but I'm going to have to get to a break and we'll pick up with this later on in the show, so bear with me. Sorry about having to move on. Always enthralled to the breaks. After the break, another hour of conversation, starting with today's Great Britain, Kevin Rodham, who has been delivering much needed aid to the people of Ukraine.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. Coming up in the second hour, our Great Britain, Kevin Rodham, joins us from just outside Lviv, where he has been delivering aid to the people of Ukraine. We will learn about the discovery which has given us an incredible insight into our ancestors who walked the earth over 3 million years ago. And in East Lancashire, possible prehistoric finds have been excavated on Calf Hill. We'll find out more later this hour. You're watching GB News and I'm Neil Oliver. Let's get the news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The race for Prime Minister is gaining momentum, with the newly appointed Chancellor becoming the latest MP to launch his leadership bid. Nadeem Zahawi's pledging to lower taxes, boost defence spending and continue with education reforms. His announcement comes after the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps joined the contest, along with former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and Rishi Sunak. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to run. Earlier, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who was tipped as a frontrunner, ruled himself out of the race, saying he's focusing on his current job. Member for Wickham Steve Baker says the party now needs to find stability.
I know people are terribly angry and upset and bitter, and I've been called all the names under the sun, But we've got to face the reality. If he wasn't going, he couldn't form a government, and you just can't go on like that. You can't stand alone. You've got to form a government, and his government just collapsed. And that's very serious. What we need is political stability. I regret he's going. It's the right decision. We need to now try and find an optimistic way forward.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has appeared in court charged with rape. Special Constable Paul Hoyle was arrested in Essex on Wednesday following an alleged attack near Newport in Shropshire. He's been suspended from the force and has been remanded in custody. Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced he will step down on Wednesday. It follows growing unrest with protesters setting fire to his home in the capital. Anti-government demonstrators stormed his official residence, with some taking advantage of the swimming pool. The announcement comes just hours after the Prime Minister said he's willing to resign to make way for an all-party government. Protesters are demanding a change in regime as the country sees its worst economic crisis in more than 70 years. And history's been made at Wimbledon, with Elena Rybakina becoming the first player from Kazakhstan to win a Grand Slam title. The 23-year-old fought back to beat Tunisian third seed Ons Jabeur in 3 sets in the women's singles final. She was born in Moscow, but despite Wimbledon's ban on Russian and Belarusian players after the invasion of Ukraine, Rybakina was allowed to compete. She switched to represent Kazakhstan 4 years ago. There to present the champion with the Venus Rosewater dish, the Duchess of Cambridge. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. My Great Britain tonight is calling for more help for Ukrainians whose lives have been wrecked by war. Grandfather, Kevin Rodham, a retired engineer from Weardale in County Durham, is now on his 3rd trip to Ukraine, delivering clothes and food bought with donations. Kevin fears that because coverage of the situation in Ukraine has fallen down the news schedule, people around the world think the worst is over for those in the affected areas. He joins me now. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Neil. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How many trips have you made to Ukraine now?
I've made 3 trips over into Poland and then on to Ukraine, but this particular visit, I've been into the Ukraine 8 times now, and I'm actually speaking to you from the Ukraine at this moment in time.
What has been your mode of transport? How are you coming back and forth?
I travelled over with my van and trailer, and been kind enough to leave the trailer in Poland, and then utilise the van itself to travel deeper into the Ukraine, carrying down aid to where it's most needed.
Tell me, what persuaded you to get involved? You know, most of us watch events unfold. What inspired you to get behind the wheel of a van and head off?
I think, like most people, when the war started and we started to see the refugees coming over the border, and then we hear news of refugees freezing to death at the main border crossing in Meduka, because, of course, the temperatures at that time were down below 30 degrees. I watched it on the TV, and then I thought, look, I've got to do something here. I just can't sit and see it happen. I'm retired, I've got a van, and I've got the use of a trailer. So, you know, what more can you put into the recipe to do good?
Can you describe for us damage and devastation that you have seen on your trips?
I can. This week in particular, I went down to Bucha. As we well know, Bucha was under Russian occupation for about a month. And the Russian press, they advised everyone in the world that they were only targeting military establishments. I've got photographic evidence as I walked round Butcher where apartment blocks have been decimated. People were in these blocks when they were shelled. There's also areas where they buried tanks. They buried the tanks to protect them while they actually devastated the apartment blocks. The idea then was to bring the tanks out and then to continue pushing forward. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian defenders saw what was happening and took evasive action. But the photographs that you're seeing there are devastating, to say the least, and only tell part of the picture, because as you're walking round, you get that acrid smell of burning still emitting from the areas. And, of course, you can see some of the Russian tanks that were taken out during that particular battle.
Mm. Is the summer making lives easier or harder? What are people putting up with? And indeed, what are you putting up with living out of your van from time to time, I imagine?
It is getting a little warm, although today has been a bit of a respite. Today I was actually in Lviv itself, and it rained, which was quite pleasant. And I never ever thought that I would say, for an Englishman, to say that it's nice to feel a little bit of rain on you. But today was. But this evening it got very, very humid. Mosquitoes are a bit of a problem, and I have been bitten quite badly. But that heals up. That's nothing compared to some of the suffering that I've seen with the refugees.
What are you seeing? What have you been seeing in terms of just ordinary people living as best they can?
Yeah, the aid, initially, the world started to bring a lot of aid and send a lot of aid over. As this war has actually fallen down the headline news, that aid is starting to dry up. And the consequence of that is that it's not actually getting to the people that need it. I've seen people, met one lady in particular in Dnipro, an absolutely marvellous lady. She runs a refugee centre. It's a drop-in centre where the refugees just pop in for a chat, for something to eat, and if they need any assistance, she gives them assistance. She also cooks between 400 and 600 meals a day for the soldiers on the front line, which isn't too far away from Dnipro. She has a small team of ladies working in a kitchen that is absolutely baking hot. It's unreal, the work that this lady is doing. If anyone deserves an accolade, that is this particular lady. And I would love to name her, but for her own security, I can't do that.
You say that you've been in relative proximity to the front line. Have you seen fighting, and have you felt in danger?
No, I haven't seen any fighting, and to be perfectly candid, no, I haven't felt in any danger. We have seen, we've been in areas where the air raid siren starts sounding, and for someone that's never heard that before, it is daunting. We have taken refuge in underground kitchens and felt reasonably safe.
Kevin Rodham, you're a fine chap. This is a moment in the show every week when I try to lift my head above the cut and thrust of the events that are bringing us down back home, and to be reminded of good people putting themselves out to try and make the part of the world they can reach a better place. So, Kevin, for all of your endeavour and just for the sheer physical effort and commitment that you've shown to helping regular people live through something they neither want nor deserve, well done. And you're certainly
Thank you very much, Neil. Can I just
qualify
say
wholeheartedly as a Great Britain.
Can I just say a very big thank you to the people that have supported me.
Stay safe and best of luck. What do you make of it? What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, I think the best thing people can do is continue to donate and support these kind of grassroots efforts where you do know very clearly that the aid is getting to where it's needed.
You do feel, though, Lisa, that the news schedules just moved, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
It was number one. It was constant.
Constant.
All that anybody was
Breaking
talking
news.
about, and then
it's gone. And it really has
The
gone.
circus moves on.
I think what was it, Kevin? What he said,
Kevin.
yeah, what he said there. Again, we've got to remember this, that in the face of great adversity and in the face of things that are way beyond your control, people do things. You know, they cook, women cook, they feed each other, they help each other out. And I think that is a great thing that you've just said, to remember that there are good people. So tonight we've been a bit down, but there are really good people out there that know they're connected to community.
Yeah, and there's just no, you can only look on what Kevin's doing in a positive light.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever you think about politics, that's a person who's just motivated by an understanding that there are people, ordinary people, in want of food or clothes or whatever. He finds himself in a position to do something about it, and so he does.
And I think he rightly highlights as well the huge groundswell in Ukraine as well to support these kinds of efforts, and the fact that what's kind of inspired so many people and the reason why it became such a big story that resonated with people was the fact that as much as the situation seems to be getting increasingly dire in the east of Ukraine, the kind of will to fight, the will to organise, the will to resist of the Ukrainian people is something that really should continue to inspire people. And that's why I think everybody, as much as people might be feeling the pinch at the moment, everybody where they can should look to support Ukraine and Ukrainians in this effort. But also we need to keep the pressure on our governments to kind of keep supplying Ukraine with the weapons it needs to defend itself.
OK, moving on as always. If you've ever fancied owning some fairground memorabilia, your moment has come. A huge collection is going under the hammer, and we'll meet someone who is helping to arrange the sale.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now it's time for some of your reactions to what's been happening so far on the programme. I have it here. Clive says, it feels like we are all under the rule of an occupying force and a potentially hostile one. Interesting. Gary says, I voted for Brexit and would do so again. Johnson lost his job because of his incompetence and an inability to let a word of truth escape his mouth. Thank you, Neil, for being a voice in these desperate times. I am not alone now. God bless you. Thank you, Paddy. I'll have that. Pat says, I would vote for Neil Oliver for Prime Minister. And my rotting corpse. No, thank you very much. Everyone should feel the same after just hearing from him. Amazing. All so true. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for the sentiment. Ray says, maybe it's about time the people on the right in politics get out on the streets and protest instead of it being the preserve of the left. And Maureen says, I also feel sick to death of what the wealthy are doing to we the people. I want to rise up and fight for my freedom. Well said. The next story this evening is indisputably the product of what you might call a fairground attraction. An unparalleled collection of fairground memorabilia will go under the auctioneer's hammer later this month. Collected over the decades by Northamptonshire man Roger Austin, his collection amounts to many hundreds of items, including veritable herds of carousel horses, wooden swing boats, pedal cars and entire fairground rides. 100 individual lots are expected to go for more than £20,000. Jeremy Curzon, auctioneer and valuer from Cheffins, joins me to tell us more about it. Good evening, Jeremy.
Good evening, Neil.
Thank you for making time for me. The scale of this collection is staggering. I've seen some pictures. Have you ever encountered anything like it?
Never. No, it's unparalleled in my working experience, that's for sure. It was quite the thing as we started out with an invitation from the family to look at the late Roger Austin's collection of vehicles. And whilst I was doing my usual thing of poking about in other people's barns and sheds and things, it became clear that there was an awful lot there more to get our teeth into if the family allowed us to. There you see one of the lovely wooden carousel horses that we have in the sale. Beautiful thing, and probably quite early. There's something more from my era, probably from the 70s, I should think. Pop that over your child's foot of their bed at night. That'll give them
They'll never sleep again.
It's quite a fascinating and unique sort of thing to look at. And little bits from what they call juvenile rides, the kiddies' rides, just, hauled straight out the back of various lorry bodies that we discovered.
Now, did the family tell you how the collection came about? I mean, it looks like the dedicated effort of decades.
Well, Roger Austin was a man. He ran a very serious car salvage business. And so he was in the habit of being out and about and pulling various vehicles from various places. And he came across fairground vehicles and fairground things, and it just took to it. And he'd been doing it most of his adult life, and it's something his family very, very fondly remember. He used to set up fairgrounds for the children's birthdays, for example. He must have been a very, very kind father indeed. That's a lot of work. But he'd been collecting for years.
You'd have to imagine looking at it that here was somebody, Mr. Austin, who had an absolute love of the fair. It must be somebody who either he'd been attending the fair in childhood or whatever. Maybe he felt almost the call to go away and work on the fair. But it's almost obsessional.
Well, a lot of our clients are a little like that, in as much as it's the British disease, collecting, really, and we all do it. We're all guilty of it. But he was just in a position to go one further and fill building after building up with these beautiful, beautiful things, and then he just pursued them. He got the bug, and he pursued the finding of these things and built up his contacts. And indeed, he became very, very influential with the Fairground Heritage Trust. And he was responsible for helping them out in a big way. I'd love to have met him, but he died 17 years ago now. And the family have sort of only really found the need to move this on in recent months, really.
When it comes to the auction, what would you say is the star of the show, the lot that you're most excited about?
There are many. I mean, we all remember the fairgrounds so fondly, And these items are not from the era of steam and Victorian ladies and gents in their top hats. This is from the 60s, the 70s. It was an exciting era when we all went to the fair, the music, the kind of perceived danger, if you like. Teddy boys, should I say, on the back of your Dodgem car. Those, the smell of the candy floss, all that sort of thing. It's very, very exciting stuff. And therefore, I think there's a lot of people who would love to own a little piece of this. And some of these things just fit beautifully into the house. We've got several clients who are really into their fairground collecting, and I've been to visit people who've got waltzer chairs in their living room, done as some settees. There's a bumper car in their hallway, all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of stuff in the sale, which is very exciting. But for me personally, I would say that the full-size horses, known as gallopers, came from a galloper ride. They, to me, are the most exciting, and they would probably command most money.
Fantastic stuff. Just quickly tell us where and when is the auction taking place?
Well, the auction is taking place at Sutton, which is near Ely in Cambridgeshire. It's on Saturday, the 23rd of this month, and you can come and view it on the 22nd, or you can look at our website, which is cheffins.co.uk. And it is just the first tranche of 3 that we'll be selling for the Austin family.
Fantastic stuff, Jeremy Curzon. All the best with the auction. Fascinating to contemplate. And if I had room in my house, I think I'd go for some of those gallopers without a doubt.
You can always make room. Scream if you want to go faster.
Were you a fan of the fair, Lisa?
I love the fair. I love the fair. Well, I come from Nottingham, and so we have the biggest fair in Europe, the Goose Fair.
Yes.
But I'm going to be political about this. Yeah, we've not had it for 3 years, obviously because of COVID. And last year we were going to have it. The council wanted to put a big fence around it and charge to get in. And the fair people said, well, we're not going to do it then. We've got a 500-year history here. If people can't come for free, then we're not doing it.
That's yet another indictment, is it not?
Yeah. I mean, it's like the gentleman referred to the fact that kind of the attraction or the historical interest in the fair was it's a place of slight danger. There's also obviously like books and films that feature like this like, dark side of the fairground. And that is a key part of its appeal. And kind of in contemporary society when everything, to use a kind of cliche, but like everything's slightly more health and safety obsessed, and those kind of like darker sides of things are often like shaved off, and I think we lose something then.
And it's
a sad day. It'll be a very sad day if we don't have British fairs anymore. It'd be a very sad day.
It feels like more of what felt absolutely deliberate, an attempt to discourage people from the places they had always gone to be together with each other. And I mean, going to the fair, I mean, anyone who grew up in Britain, it's in my memories, it's in all of our memories, and going back generations, you went to the fair for all sorts of things, but more than anything else, it was just to be in the crowd.
Well, Tina, I mean, when I was young, we used to go ladding. Do you say that anymore? Ladding.
Crack on.
Ladding, just to as teenagers to meet lads. And, that was a place, I don't know if you've ever seen Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, the film, by Alan Sillitoe. It is a great scene set in Goose Fair. And I think it's a great British tradition. And I really worry, actually, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, I wonder what's happened to them. Are they still going? Because they would have been really hit badly.
It's just the fair, almost everything about it is anathema to that kind of globalising agenda. All that cash changing hands.
Yes.
Paper notes, not to mention the you know, the penny waterfall and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
All of these things that just circulated in a way that, you know, the authorities that want to keep track of money,
Yeah.
that all just disappears.
Well,
and
they're kind of like, they are unsafe spaces, really.
Yes.
Like the fair.
that's
And
the
those
whole
kind
point.
of, like you say, going to meet boys, or like those places where you could just have slightly unstructured
Yes.
interactions without
Yeah.
the mediation of authorities and
Yeah.
without being over-policed. And whether it's fairs or carnivals or
Yes,
street
yeah.
parties or protests, whatever, everything is slightly more tightly controlled nowadays. And we obviously lose something when that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the kids, as kids, get up really early in the morning on the last day, and you'd go and try and find all the money that would come out of people's pockets. And if the fairground people caught you, they would give you a clip round the ear because it was their money. You know, if it comes out of someone's pockets on their rides, it's their money. And you're right. What will happen in the future where, you know, we've all got card machines?
I know.
It takes that away.
Are people going to pay for candy flossing to get on the waltzers by waving their phones about? Or
Yes, I should imagine that they are.
oh, no. Such a joyless concept, such a joyless future that somebody somewhere has in mind. Let's move on. Fossils of our ancient ancestors excavated from a cave in South Africa in the 1940s have been found, more recently, to be 1 million years older than previously thought. The timescales are mind-boggling, but the recent re-examination of the remains provide us with a glimpse of little figures that walked the Earth around 3.7 million years ago. Joining me to consider the implications of the new understanding of the precious fossils are paleoarchaeologist Kathy Kuman and paleoanthropologist Ron Clark. How many syllables can two people fit into their professions? I ask myself. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for making time.
Hello. Yes, hi.
Kathy, what species are these ancestors?
Oh, the ancestors were actually excavated from 1936 even to the present. And they belong to Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus prometheus from Stokefontein Caves. The ones that are recently dated. And the dates that we have are 3.4 million, which is about 1 million years older than what they were previously considered to be or debated to be. We've always thought they were older, personally.
Now, these ancestors, these distant ancestors that you're talking about, what would they have looked like? What are we dealing with were we to encounter them walking around in our world?
They would have looked rather ape-like, gorilla-like, and chimpanzee-like, but walking on two legs, walking upright. But they were small-brained with projecting muzzles, but with human-like teeth and human-like legs. So recently we unearthed a complete skeleton of an Australopithecus, as they're called, and that showed for the first time that their legs were longer than their arms, just as ours are. So they had more human-like proportions to their skeleton.
Would they have been living in the cave in which the remains were found?
No, certainly they weren't living in the caves, because they were unlike the caves that you find in Europe, where, for example, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons have been found. The caves in South Africa are vertical shafts in limestone rock. And so the only way the bones entered those caves was by falling in or being dropped in by carnivores, animals such as leopards and saber-toothed cats that may have fed on these creatures and then dropped the bones in through the shafts. But this one particular skeleton that we call Littlefoot actually fell in by accident. And so we had the complete skeleton preserved. That's a rare occurrence. Normally we find only fragments or isolated bones.
Was the South Africa they knew similar in terms of climate and and coverage of plants and the rest of it to the present day? Would it look like the South Africa we know?
No, it was more forested. We know from the kind of animals we find there, and also from the deposit where we find the greatest number of these Australopithecus fossils, such as those you see on the screen now. There we found remains of lianas or vines that hang down from large trees, and those particular species of vines you only find now in tropical West and Central Africa. So we know it was a more tropical climate, at least along the river course.
And what animals did they share their environment with?
With many kinds of carnivores, saber-toothed cats, leopards and lions as we know them today, a great variety of monkeys. There were very large monkeys that we call parapapio that were rather baboon-like in size. And
Calicothea.
Calicothea, yes, that was an interesting creature, a sort of a mixture between a horse and a rhino, a very large creature with a horse-like head, but it had enormous claws on its feet.
It was Macapania.
Macapania was very similar to the takin that you find in the Himalayas, or the muskox that you find in the Arctic.
So the animals have been
Kathy,
used.
Kathy, can I ask what is the significance of this extension of the date range that's associated with these finds? What does it tell us about the human story that these fossils are so much older than previously thought?
It really extends the time for a lot more to happen in human evolution than was debated before. It makes us more equivalent in time to what was going on in East Africa about 3.7 million years ago and 3 to 3.7 million years ago. We've been fighting for a long time to demonstrate that our sites are equally as old, and they've been debated back and forth because of the difficulty of dating these sites. Now we have a method that allows us to see their true age. And Ron can speak to the significance of it in terms of human evolution. So.
Yes, well, for a long time, it was thought that these fossils from Sterkfontein and from another site in South Africa called Makapansgat were between 2.1 and 2.6 million years old. And so they were considered much younger than fossils such as Lucy in Ethiopia that date back to 3.2 million to 3.8 million years ago. And so many of our colleagues believe that Australopithecus afarensis from Ethiopia was ancestral to Australopithecus africanus and that we find in South Africa. We can now see that in fact they were contemporaries, they were overlapping in age. So the concept of afarensis being ancestral to Africanus does not hold water anymore.
The significance also is that it allows us to understand the paleo environments at the time. This is a major emphasis in our kinds of studies in paleoanthropology. So now we know more accurately that there was gallery forest, remnant of old tropical forests that once existed in our area of South Africa. But it was actually a mosaic landscape. While it was much moister than today, it was more wooded, much more wooded. And change happened in terms of the drying out of the African climate only around 1.7 million years ago. And sites like Sterkfontein really demonstrate both the human evolution story and the background, the environmental background in which it occurred and the pressures that these early hominids evolved against.
one also has to remember that the fossils which we find come from a limited number of sites in South and East Africa. And these early hominids, or Australopithecus, obviously extended over vast areas of Africa. There must have been links between South and East Africa, and the gaps in between have not yet been filled with fossil discoveries. There are a couple of specimens that have been found in Malawi, but there are large areas that are still requiring further exploration. And we may find that there are other species of Australopithecus yet to be uncovered.
The challenges that we've faced in South Africa are that because of our particular geology, which is a limestone cave, underground cave system, of karst geology, our sites are like keyhole sites, they're called, where we get glimpses of change through time and fossils through time. Whereas in East Africa, where they have easier dating methods, you can see entire landscapes for a couple of, 2, 3, 4 kilometers even, as a slice through time across space, whereas we're looking at more like snapshots in time.
Kathy Cuman and Ron Clark, tantalising glimpses back towards the page 1 of the human story. Thank you for your time this evening.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Neil.
Quite something, isn't it, Lisa, to be reminded that the story of we sitting here goes back not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of years.
Quite mind-boggling, really, isn't it? And when you start to think about how did those, people, how were they living? How were they, forming families and communities? For me, as a sociologist, that's the immediate thing I think about.
It's that you're back into that territory where they're stepping literally and metaphorically out of animal and towards human.
Yeah, and that's when you start to wonder, because you know that the differences between species is the way that we form societies, and that's one of the great things about the human being is they form communities, societies. They're not the natural. They're not the greatest animal naturally, but we're really good at forming societies. So it makes you wonder what they were doing to survive or not.
Jacob, what do we learn from these shadowy glimpses of the very beginnings of our story?
Well, and it's great to have those kind of expert voices on. I think the thing that it says for me is, to be human is to search for origins, and that we're fascinated by that question of when precisely did human life or recognisably human life emerge? But that's because we as human beings really do stand apart from the rest of the animal kingdom in that we ask that foundational and fundamental question: where do we come from? Who am I? What does this all mean? And that's why these are interesting and super exciting. But they kind of they for me just prove how different, how distinct it is that we as human beings are capable of asking these kind of questions about our origins.
Yeah, and for me, it's the fact that any of those individuals from nearly 4 million years ago survive at all.
Story.
Well, I remember being told about the unlikeliness of fossilisation. We're all familiar with fossils, ichthyosaurs and the rest that you see in the Natural History Museum and all the rest of it. But the chance of being fossilised is incredibly remote. So that if you imagine the whole population of North America, 300 million people, if they all died now, in all likelihood, you'd be lucky to find 1/4 of one person fossilised, in the future.
Yeah.
And so that they're finding a cave like that where there's not one, but multiple survivals from 4 million years ago. It's just... And
it makes you want to build that picture and tell that story, doesn't it? What happened to to whoever fell down the hole.
I know. We all go back one way or another by a dotted line to those shadowy figures. Moving on, after the break, we'll be discussing more excavations taking place at Calf Hill in East Lancashire and the amazing discoveries being made.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Mark Dolan tonight in The Big Question. With young people having less sex than their parents, are we in a sex recession? We'll hear from a woman who gave it up for 22 years. And in My Big Opinion, two topics. Brexit Britain is outperforming the Eurozone, and it's time for the big state to shrink back down to size. Plus, is the Twitter deal with Elon Musk over? And another senior moment for Joe Biden. We'll get reaction from the US with the queen of political reporting, Kinsey Schofield. See you at 9.
Welcome back. After a journey back in time just now to the southern Africa of more than 3 million years ago, next I can take you to a slice of history through the East Lancashire countryside that reaches from the Second World War to the Stone Age. Archaeologists excavating on Calf Hill, north of Sebden in East Lancashire, have found the area dotted with enigmatic traces of all manner of periods of history, from a flint blade to a burial mound, to a medieval road, to 20th century bullets and the fin from a mortar shell. Archaeologist in charge of the project is Catherine Rousseau, who has taken a break to talk to me now. Hello, Catherine. Can you hear me, Catherine? I don't think Catherine can hear me.
Yes.
I can tell you that it's archaeological survey and excavation across an area, and oh, wait a minute, I think we do. Do we have Catherine now? No, we don't have Catherine back yet. But it's, and I think to everyone's surprise, although hopefully Catherine can elucidate further, it's a whole cornucopia of periods that have been discovered. I think, previously there had been excavation of something that has now proved to be a Neolithic burial mound, I think. I think Catherine will be able to tell us if there are human remains associated with it. Flint tools. But the wonder of it is, in the location, they've found that the whole place has been occupied again and again and again. So you've got trackways and routes that were used in the medieval period. And then, most amazingly of all, in some respects, it was used as a training area for the Home Guard, I believe. Mm. So there's practice trenches, and there's spent bullets, and there's even the fin off of a mortar shell that they've been using. You were saying in the break that your own sister is fascinated by this sort of material.
Oh God! I mean, my sister, She's actually a beauty therapist, but she's always wanted to be an archaeologist. And so she's just fascinated with this. Her favourite programme, and mine as well, is the Detectorists. Oh. And it's got, I don't know if you've ever seen that programme, but it's about finding things from the past, but it's about telling those stories. And I think that's what captures us about, archaeology, it's the stories, isn't it? It's you like, you know, when you were saying in the break about holding something that's 2 million years old, and the hairs go up on the back of your neck because you're thinking about the stories.
I think people, you would naturally imagine that the biggest thrill is to come from finding, well, treasure, you know, like gold coins.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, you know, to see something like that come out of the ground is undeniably exciting. But there's something deeper about the everyday.
Yeah.
So if you find a stone tool, for example, that someone put a sharp edge on and used for a while and maybe lost by accident or maybe buried deliberately for some or other reason, or put in a grave alongside a lost loved one, it's when you handle the things that we can all identify with.
Yeah.
Or when you find the trace of a cooking fire, you know, you can instantly connect with people that had to cook food. You know, we don't all own gold coins.
Or a child's toy.
Yes. Well, it's
I imagine
those human touches.
I imagine finding something that a child had. I mean, I don't know, I've never done this, but I imagine finding something that a child has handled in the past. I imagine that's very emotional.
And when you see they've discovered the kind of, as you say, everyday tools, but with some ornamentation to it, the kind of the development of kind of needless ornamentation is really interesting and tells us again a lot about what it is to be human and the need for there to be beauty in the everyday, and how everybody, kind of no matter how humble or kind of prehistoric almost their circumstances might be, you feel a need as a human being to decorate and ornament your life and make it kind of distinguishably yours and unique. And those things I think really captivate people.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing as either as affecting as human remains. You know, I was thinking all the way through when they were talking about those fossils of early human ancestors. When you're in the presence of a grave, you know, from say several hundred years ago or several thousand years ago, what's most striking? I mean, beyond the fact that, you know, when you see a skeleton, they're very beautiful. You know, they're architectural engineering wonders, human skeletons, and when you see them, you're struck by that. They almost look like art installations somehow. But there's then that unexpected discovery of what that person meant to the people that were left behind, and you see it in the way the body was treated, and you see it sometimes in the items that were put into the grave with them, because these are little short sketches of what that person had meant in that slice of time that they occupied as human beings. Yeah. And it takes you by surprise to realise that along with the human bones and the stone tools, you're actually excavating grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've spoken about this on your programme before, I know, but the degree to which that practice of honouring the dead goes back is such an integral part of human culture. And as what you've talked about before is, I mean, through the lockdown and the way that, I mean, people weren't allowed to properly bury and grieve for their loved ones, and yet you can go back, as you say, like thousands of years, and this was just like taken for granted as an assumption of human culture that we must honour and grieve for the dead.
I think what we're talking about is are the basics and the fundamentals of what it is to be human and alive, and clearly family. And you know, I think when we were joined there for a while by Dr. Rakib Hassan, I think there were the points that you had wanted to develop based around what he was saying about the significance of the family and the foundational role.
Yeah, and those areas that are important to keep kind of distinct from the state and distinct from economic processes and the kind of autonomous spheres of human culture and human family that kind of people cherish and that only really make sense when they're kept separate and aside and special, and those distinctions that evolve through human history between public and private, between kind of public things and sacred things, and those distinctions are really important, and it's kind of incumbent on all of us to figure out ways anew to kind of defend those distinctions.
I asked the doctor, and I would ask you as well, what do you think would be the motivation for anyone seeking to undermine the fundamental unit that is the family? Because that is demonstrably happening, that here and there the authorities are trying to come between parents and children.
Well, from the work that I read and some of the thinkers that I kind of understand and respect, I think it's slightly different in that it's more that lots of people in society, and you're right that lots of people in positions of power, but have kind of forgotten how to articulate and value those simple kind of basic things like the importance of the family, the importance of the private sphere. And in a culture where it's difficult to give meaning and purpose and talk openly about what those kind of things mean to people, I think there are always going to be forces in society that kind of take to me, it's like wacky ideas and run with it. But it's when kind of people and communities and societies generally lose faith in what they're about, that those kind of slightly niche things become kind of suddenly central. I think that loops back to what you said at the beginning, is why are people now feeling that there's something wrong? And I think that this kind of loops back into our history, where we've chosen our communities, we've decided how they look and what we do and what we value in them. And here we are, and I think there is something post-pandemic about it, where people are not, they don't feel like they've got that freedom or choice anymore to decide what happens in their lives or in their communities. And I think that's the link for me throughout, you know, the whole of the show, really, to the fairgrounds, to the archaeology. We're talking about stories and the way that people live. And that's fundamental to who we are. You start taking that away from us, even the candy floss, people feel uneasy. And I think in the last few years, a lot's been taken away. And I think that's the reason for the unease.
I said at the top of the show that my response to what began to unfold, I realised it was physical. You know, it wasn't just thoughts that I was having. It was a physical response. And stress was part of it, but there was something more profound. And I get the impression that you think the same, that people out there have reached a point where they're responding, you know, in a very natural way, not an intellectual way. No. It's a flight or fight response that's being provoked in a lot of people.
Yeah, I think there is something out there where people are feeling very emotional about lots of things that don't necessarily all connect. I think there'll be viewers on the show tonight. Just the fairground will start to get them to think about money and what that means. I do think there's something. And I mean, you mentioned, you generously, when you introduced me, said that I work at the Battle of Ideas charity, and we're running this event next weekend. And the reason we're putting this event on, it's called the Academy. People can go to theboi.co.uk, theboi.co.uk/academy, and they can find out about it. But the reason we're doing it is because there is this sense in society that people don't quite know which direction things are headed in. People don't understand the trends and the forces that are shaping society. As you keep asking, well, what's the meaning in this? Who's driving this? Why is this happening? And I think that's a widely shared, whether it's kind of physical or psychological or intellectual, people are asking these questions, and it's kind of up to us to answer them. There's going to be, nobody's going to come and hand it down from on high. There's no 10 commandments to give us. We have to go and understand the forces at work in society, the intellectual trends, and that's kind of what this event that we're running is all about.
Over the past few weeks, there's been a recurrent theme in what many contributors have been saying, which is about alternatives. Over and over again, people have been saying, in relation to education, people have been saying, we have to start again. Yeah. We have to start new schools, primary and secondary. And when it comes to university education, people are saying, well, the solution there is to abandon the universities and start again.
I tell my students that at university, I have the debate with them about, you know, if we could get rid of the fees, would you... It's very sad, actually. I'll say, if we get rid of the fees and you wouldn't get a degree at the end, would you still come to university? And they go, no, because I need the piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, what if I told you it was just a piece of paper? They'll go, yeah, but I need it to get a job. And we've disconnected somewhere between knowledge.
It is a disconnection, isn't it? I mean, university education, I would have said, ought to be and should always have been something you were drawn to do by passion, but it's not, is it?
Yeah. Well, again, this event, I don't want to come across as too much of a salesman, but this event, when we started it, the tagline was "University as it should be," because we thought that there were things going on that university, as you say, become a piece of paper, and that more than that, it was no longer a space to kind of step outside and think. No. And that's kind of what we need in society.
Yeah. That's what we need. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks as always to my panel, Lisa Mackenzie and Jacob Reynolds. Thank you so much for being with me. Next up, it's Ministry of Offence.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK's looking fine and dry with plenty of sunshine as high pressure continues to dominate. Let's take a closer look. A warm and sunny start across southwest England. Any mist or fog patches will quickly clear. Then we're looking at a dry picture with light winds. Temperatures around 16 Celsius. A dry start across southeast England on Sunday morning with any low cloud and mist patches soon clearing. Plenty of sunshine with temperatures quickly rising. A mainly sunny morning for much of Wales, though some low cloud may linger for a time across the far north of the country. Northwest England will get off to a rather cloudy start. However, this cloud will soon clear and we'll have plenty of sunshine developing. Temperatures around 15 Celsius with winds staying light. A sunny start to Sunday morning across northeast England. Perhaps a little low cloud around at first. Winds will be light and will be on the warm side with temperatures of 15 Celsius. Patchy rain will continue across Orkney and Shetland during Sunday morning, but largely dry and sunny elsewhere, though some western areas may stay rather cloudy in places. Temperatures around 14 Celsius. A rather cloudy start to Sunday morning across Northern Ireland, though it will be on the dry side, an increasing chance of some sunshine developing as the morning moves on. It'll be a dry, hot and sunny day ahead for much of the UK, with temperatures approaching 30 degrees Celsius. And that's how the weather's shaping up.
I'm Mark Dolan.